Discover how a former spy used seduction techniques to target a dangerous criminal. Aliia Roza describes her mission involving a criminal gang. She lured the target by offering a massage and then had him arrested. Raj Shamani introduces Aliia as a former secret agent with expertise in behavioral profiling. Aliia explains techniques to make targets sexually dependent on the spy. She demonstrates how post-sex affirmations can reinforce the target's belief in her power over him. Aliia shows her diploma and discusses influencing a target by analyzing social media profiles. Aliia discusses signs of insecurity in body language during group photos. Aliia describes a 40-minute session where students faced a computer with loud rhythmic sounds and graphics. Aliia explains feeling emptiness, peace, and lack of fear after the session. She explains that sex techniques were part of their training, focusing on pleasing the partner. Aliia details how anchors could be used to boost or damage a person's self-esteem during sexual encounters. Aliia explains that they were taught to use anchoring techniques to make targets sexually dependent on them. The guest explains using anchoring techniques to condition responses. The guest describes a technique involving specific words and body touches to boost confidence. The guest discusses manipulative tactics used by power couples and honey trap agents. She explains how touching a specific spot can activate brain signals for pleasure or success. She describes how an intelligence agency taught her sex techniques to control men emotionally. Aliia explains that intelligence agencies use personal preferences, especially in sex, to manipulate targets. They identify weak spots by asking questions and observing intimate interactions to ensure the target has the best experience. She mentions engaging in unconventional sexual activities like public encounters to increase excitement and arousal. Aliia compares this technique to how teenagers get aroused from horror movies due to the release of adrenaline and dopamine. Aliia discusses the role of adrenaline in attraction, mentioning roller coasters. She explains how combining physical and emotional excitement can lead to better sexual experiences with a partner. Aliia advises giving the target freedom in intimate situations, suggesting it aligns with male desires. She explains how men might seek relaxation and pleasure from a female after a hard day's work. Aliia recommends talking about exciting adventures to build interest before introducing specific desires. After the initial attention and chemistry, the person suddenly disappears, causing emotional distress. The manipulator returns with more love bombing to regain the victim's interest after a fabricated absence. This cycle of emotional highs and lows creates an addiction similar to drug consumption. Aliia confirms the authenticity and details of her diploma with Raj. The host asks Aliia to describe a mission from start to finish, including briefing, implementation, and exit. Aliia begins recounting a mission involving a new criminal gang in the city that was not yet powerful but had smaller gangs under its control. She describes the initial setup of the mission after working for about 6 months in the department. Aliia mentions the presence of a significant criminal gang and smaller groups operating under it, though she avoids using specific terms for clarity. Aliia describes a small gang leading them to Vladimir. Aliia mentions some of these women disappeared over time. They suspect Vladimir might be involved in trafficking young women for sex work abroad. Aliia explains the high value of Russian models due to their appearance. Parents reported their daughters going missing after visiting clubs with Vladimir. Aliia details Vladimir's routine of having multiple women around him each evening. Raj mentions Aliia occasionally joined the club to observe Vladimir herself. Aliia describes how she would mimic the outfits of popular girls at a club. She explains that adopting their appearance and behavior was part of seduction techniques. Aliia dressed similarly to a colleague for the next club night, hoping to attract attention. She danced at the bar and engaged in conversation with her target, using humor to gain his interest. Aliia sat closer to her target, whispering provocatively to get his attention that night. Aliia explains she learned massage techniques used for relaxation and arousal. She uses these skills to gain time by convincing a criminal employee to fall asleep during a massage. Aliia's team then enters through a hidden door while she pretends the massage is complete. The team arrests some targets, with some members handling cleaning and terminations. Aliia explains how security was not present at their bedroom, where she and her team entered through a back door. She details the process of studying Raj's routine to find an entry point, noting that he usually had only 2 men with him. Aliia mentions using perfume as a weapon during their mission. She discusses how people make judgments about others in just a few seconds based on appearance and scent. Aliia describes the KGB's creation of a special perfume formula using organic Russian plants for their mission. Aliia explains that a perfume can increase pheromones, making one more attractive to others. The host explains that intelligence agencies have mastered techniques to extract information and manipulate people, asking the guest to identify one key human trait. The guest identifies patience as crucial for manipulation, giving examples of how rush tactics can be used in various contexts like shopping and business deals. Aliia discusses manipulating someone through creating urgency in a relationship or business context. Aliia explains how to create urgency in relationships by showing appreciation publicly. She gives examples of posting about gifts or messages from admirers on social media. Aliia advises using the threat of family disapproval to pressure men into commitment. She mentions breaking up with a man who doesn't want kids as another tactic. Aliia concludes that many men would fall for these tactics because they are unaware of the red flags. She explains that he might want to marry her quickly due to the constant dopamine and their sexual chemistry. He finds it easier to stay with her than start a new relationship because of his job commitments. The host agrees that men often think this way and mentions some who believe they can't waste time dating again. She emphasizes how people might fear losing her and struggle to find someone as good or better. The host introduces the concept of seduction in a broader context than just physical attraction. She clarifies that seduction involves psychological techniques rather than mere attractiveness. Seduction is described as an art of creating a world where the target feels their best state. Aliia describes feeling loved in a world created by someone where one feels smartest and most successful. She explains how this creates dependency as the person feels meaningless without their partner's support. Raj introduces the concept of seduction and its true essence, which is attention rather than physical attractiveness. Aliia outlines a technique for creating this illusion: active listening to make someone feel understood and important. The host explains active listening and supportive questioning. She describes building an emotional bond by finding common interests. Next, she suggests creating something together to strengthen the connection. Seduction is discussed as involving trust and soul connection, not just physical intimacy. Roza emphasizes the importance of patience and time when making decisions. Aliia discusses gathering information and researching before approaching targets. She explains observing people in a room to identify potential targets quickly. Aliia details her approach of gathering information through social media before meeting someone. She mentions Instagram as a key source for understanding personality traits. Aliia explains that frequent selfies on Instagram can indicate narcissistic tendencies in someone's personality. Aliia explains how frequent selfies indicate a need for validation, pointing out narcissistic behavior. Aliia explains that such posts can signal egocentrism and self-indulgence to potential partners. Aliia explains that women are often sold for their bodies in markets. Aliia discusses the importance of understanding emotions over words. Aliia shares an example of a nuclear scientist targeted by a spy who approached him on the street. The scientist was manipulated into starting a conversation and eventually became a spy. She describes a scammer's tactic of gradually building trust before disappearing with the victim's money. The guest elaborates on how manipulators use vulnerability to gain emotional connection and later exploit it. The guest continues with more probing questions, aiming to gather information indirectly. The guest outlines tactics for making a man fall madly in love within that short window. He emphasizes that 90% of the process involves social engineering and emotional bonding rather than physical tactics. Aliia explains how psychological techniques were useful for her self-esteem issues and appearance concerns. Aliia explains her role in missions, comparing Russian conditions to Los Angeles. Aliia details her role as a bait to spy on criminal activities involving vulnerable children. She details her undercover work at 18, pretending to be a victim to gather intelligence on criminal operations. Aliia went public to share how to prevent human trafficking after realizing the scale of the issue. She linked her experiences with the broader issue of human trafficking and powerful groups. Aliia Roza explains how she was told to be bait by a department head. Aliia details their method of gathering information on criminal activities like drug trafficking and human labor. Aliia explains she was instructed by her leader to impersonate a homeless girl and act as bait for potential buyers. Aliia describes the illegal groups bringing her into their house where they kept girls for various purposes including torture and sale. She speaks about her mission to prevent human trafficking and protect children online. Aliia expresses fear but continues advocating for child safety. Aliia describes the injuries of rescued individuals, noting their severe condition. Aliia mentions a Soviet school for training women as sexual agents, confirming its existence. If you enjoyed this recap, give it a like and subscribe.